Welcome to the 10 Laws with East Forest podcast. I am that guy that I just mentioned. This week, I have a conversation with Michael Muller, and he is someone who is one of the co-founders and part of the band called Balmorhea. If you haven't checked out Balmorhea, and it looks kind of like Balmorhea, H-E-A, but Balmorhea, check it out. It's one of the bands that has been a big inspiration to me going back to the very beginning of East Forest. And I mentioned to Michael how their very first record, which is called River Arms, and you can find all their records, including that record, on Spotify, was a profound one for me. And Michael's got a solo album out right now, and that album is called Lower River. We talk actually a little bit about those parallels between that first Balmorhea album, River Arms, and this new solo project of his, which is probably more than 10 years later or more, Lower River. But it's a really beautiful, beautiful work. It's melodic, but dense, emotional, yet inventive, and it's out. So you can check it out if you want to dive into this kind of music that takes you into that inner space, and it's designed for, well, just that. Cultivating an inner journey of sorts, but in the way that Michael wants to do it. So obviously it's interesting to me, and I thought it would be interesting to you. And I always like hearing about people's creative process and being able to talk to folks that inspire me. So check out that music wherever you listen to it, and he has a vinyl that you can buy too. We'll try and get those links out here in the show notes. But I'm going to China tomorrow, so I'm trying to get this out. As a matter of fact, when this comes out, I'll either be in the air or almost landing, so wish me well with the travel gods. I'm going to Shanghai for the At One festival. I don't know much about it, so this is going to be a big adventure for me, and I can't wait to tell you all about it. You can check out some pictures from the trip on Instagram and Facebook and social media, East Forest Music or East Forest. And we'll see. It's kind of a trippy thing to be going out there. I just need to remember to do what I do and, not try to figure out what they need or want, but just be like, well, look, they hired me to do this. So it's important to remember to do what I do best and treat everyone like souls, even if it feels like a very foreign place to me. We're all still souls. So I'll let you know about that soon. As soon as I'm back, I'll give you a report. Maybe I'll be over there and I can record a little episode where I can just give you my thoughts on what it's like to be on the other side of the globe out there in Shanghai. I will be in Australia in February. So all you Australia people that I've yet to meet, please help me spread the word. And I really am looking forward to this first trip. It's in February. You can see the dates at eastforest.org/tour. And other than that, man, I'm just cracking along on that music studio here in Boise. Got back up here and kind of based out of here for the winter with Rada. And I'm feeling good, feeling grateful. And we're continuing with the reworks for the Ram Dass album. And I'm helping out some artists on that. And we're just trying to get them all out so we can kind of stagger them out between now and the end of the year for you. In addition to a couple more music videos by David Altabelli, who did the home video. He's got 2 more, parts 2 and 3. So we're just really trying to help him and waiting for him to finish so we can get this all. It's kind of completes the full picture, the sister projects to the record. But it's been an amazing ride, and I can't wait to close it out right at the end of the year. Hey, if you get a second, could you review this podcast? If you're on Apple Podcasts, you just scroll back to the shows and all the way down to the bottom there, and you'll see where you can click 5 stars, which is how it's so easy. Just do that. We're just crossed 100 ratings. Thank you so much, everybody, for doing that. And if you can write a written review, write a written review. We've got some good ones in there, and I love seeing them, and everybody else does too. Share the podcast on your social medias. Hey, if you want to just send me a whole bunch of money because you like this podcast and you like these free offerings, it's a gift to you and you want to give back, go for it. info@eastforest.org. That is the PayPal address where no one has sent me money, but you could You could. It's a legal thing you can do. That is also the email where you can send me questions and say hello and tell me about your dreams and all that kind of stuff. I get some wonderful emails from people. Seriously though, if you have a question or a person you'd like me to interview or be in conversation with or whatever, a subject matter or meditation you'd like, that's the email, info@eastforest.org. Apologies if I don't get back to all of you, but I always do my best to do just that. Okay, let's get into this conversation with the great Michael Muller. Thank you for doing this. I have been a big fan, actually, of Balmorhea. I mean, gosh, I saw you guys play. I'm not sure on the year, but it was it was in a church in Union Square of New York City.
Oh, no way. You were there.
Yeah, it was for River Arms. And I remember my buddy Mark, he used to work in the music industry. I used to live in New York City, and he was like my guy who would take me to shows. You know, he'd always be like, he just always seemed to know about stuff. And he's always introducing me to stuff. And so I remember he suggested this show. And I remember going to the church. And you mind if I tell you this little story about how I got introduced to your work? And we were sitting in one of the pews, and you guys played your show, and I was enjoying it. And I remember my buddy Mark was like, talking, or I don't know, he said something and some guy like shushed him in front of us, and he told the guy, he's like, "Hey man, it's a rock concert." He's like, this is rock and roll. And he's like, "Oh, okay." And he bought your album, a CD, or River Arms afterwards. And this is, back in the CD time. And I remember we, hope it doesn't upset you, but we like ripped it. We like split the cost. He bought it, and then I got a copy of it digitally. And that album, became one of my favorite albums, and still is one of my favorite albums. There's something really special about that record to me. And actually, I remember I discovered, I took Mark because I heard you on Second Stage. Remember that? NPR's little thing. Robin Hilton had a podcast called Second Stage.
Yes. Yeah, I didn't remember the name of the show, but I remember that host.
Yeah. And they featured you guys, and I remember you used field recordings. And in my music at the time, I was just starting my East Forest project. I was also exploring a lot of field recordings, and so I remember that was sort of my doorway in. Now I'm remembering.
That is a funny thing. That actually I just looked up the archive. That show was February 29th, so a leap year day in 2008.
2008.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that church was right by just north of Gramercy Park, on the corner of Lexington and 18th, I think, something like that. Yeah,
it was near Union Square for sure. Yeah, I totally remember it. I remember what it looked like, and
that was the first show we ever played in New York, actually.
Yeah, you and I remember talking to you briefly afterwards.
Oh, really? That's funny.
Kind of discussing like, we're just kind of getting going with this, and anyway, you guys kept going, and I kept tracking your work and enjoying it. And I saw you one other time in Portland, Oregon. I moved to Portland, and I saw you at Doug Fir. You guys had a fantastic show. Yeah, you had a band, you had a drummer, you'd expanded. That was probably not too long ago. I don't know, 4 years, 5 years ago, something like that.
That's great. Yeah, we love Doug Fir.
It's a great place. I love playing there. So good on you. Thank you for being an inspiration and doing what you guys have been doing.
I'm so glad that you've kept up this long.
Yeah.
I'm glad I have as well.
Exactly. We've both been doing it a while. And that group, where I just was curious if I could just get a little more background on Balmorhea, and I'd love to get into this new work that you're putting out, which I listened to and I really enjoyed.
Oh, good.
The group Balmorhea has been described, it has some like contemporary classical edges, and I think one of your colleagues there in the group, I don't know his name, mentioned like some influences of some sort of experimental classical work like John Cage and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
But what else? I mean, did you guys have sort of an intentionality when you were making that first record about like the parameters you wanted to work in? Because you've sort of stuck with that. And Like it is largely instrumental. There's some vocalizations at times, but is that sort of like the colors you wanted to paint with and still do? And is there a reason why?
Hmm. It was never really an intentional thought when we first started. I had some just very crude guitar demos I'd recorded near the end of my time in university, and Rob, who's the other co-founder with myself,
Right.
he has a background in piano, and he had some songs he'd been working on as well. And when we met and became friends and realized we had this musical bond, I was like, well, I have some songs I'm working on. Like, what if I bring my guitar over and you can figure out a piano part and vice versa? And so that's sort of how we just started kind of working together. And then before we knew it, we had like 12 or 13 songs, and a friend asked us to play a show. And we were sitting at the springs in Balmorhea, Texas, playing guitars and just swimming uh, whenever we got the text asking to play the show. And they're like, oh, wow, this is, I guess, a real thing now. What should we call ourselves? And so we called the name of the band Where We Were Sitting. I don't know. I don't know. It just seemed to fit. And, most people don't know how to pronounce it correctly,
Right.
which you did.
Well, I've been to that town.
Oh,
I
yeah.
drove by there on my way to South by, and I had a burger there or something. And I remember thinking like, oh, this has got to be the town. You guys named it
It's the
after.
one and only. The
Yeah.
name of the town is actually not even a word. It's the first syllable from the three last names of the founding families that first settled there.
No shit. Huh.
The Ballards, the Morrows, and the Rays.
They're probably still there in some form or another.
Yes, maybe.
And so you guys did that, and it seemed to have some legs, and things really continued for you. I noticed you definitely did a lot of work in Europe as well, and then a lot of sync work because instrumental music like that
Hmm.
with sort of an emotional backbone tends to do well, and that it seems like it has done well for you guys.
Yeah, so we started, and this was the height of the MySpace era.
Yeah, right.
Before YouTube, before Instagram. I think Facebook maybe has just
Well,
started, or was it?
Friendster was around.
Oh yeah,
Remember that?
Friendster. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
but MySpace was the thing. So I remember when we pressed, we recorded our first record with a single microphone and just overdubbed every little piece on top of each other. Didn't know what we were doing, and we pressed 1,000 CDs only ourselves. And I just remember making a list of all the music I liked and the labels I followed, and tried to find as many mailing addresses as I could, and just sent out anything and everything to anyone who could maybe listen to it. And we got a few reviews on some smaller music blogs back then, and that kind of just started it. And we just started playing all the time. We did a few residencies in Austin at a couple places, and then eventually we started playing enough where people started coming and paying attention. And then we met Brian, who runs Western Vinyl, the record label we've been on
Right.
for a decade plus now. And
Yeah.
through his support and his distribution channels, and it just kind of keeps going, and here we are.
Here we are. Here we are talking. Yeah. And you guys expanded too, right? I mean, you've sort of also been committed to a bit of the band model in the sense
Yeah.
that that's kind of
Hmm.
an interesting approach as opposed to like the two core members and then you sort of swap people in and out. It seems like you've honored this idea of working with the same people over time.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, we started as two, and then added a cello, and then we added some percussion, and that our first few like bigger tours were as a quartet with cello and violin, and then guitars and piano, and then we added percussion, and then we added an upright bass. There's been sort of a revolving door in the cello and in the percussionist role, just from people moving, or having kids and not being able to tour, or having different jobs or whatever. But yeah, we've kind of stuck with pretty much the same core group. But it is Rob, the pianist, and myself, the co-founders, do continue to write all the music and arrange all the pieces
Yeah.
on the back
Do
end.
you ever do you ever think about like once you start becoming a touring band, the limitations of like adding members and the complexities that now involves when you go on tour and the costs, or do you try to just like say what's best for the music? What do we want to do? What are we inspired by?
In the past, we've just said the music has to dictate, like it's worth it, to do what we have to do to make the music the way it should be live. Um, so we've just kind of not had any parameters in terms of limits when we're writing or recording of the material for the album in terms of how it will play out in the live setting. The past album, which came out in 2017, entitled Clear Language, was kind of a wider palette. So it took a lot more preparation and resources to make that happen live. And I think in the next release we have, there will be some limitations put in place just to make it a little easier from a production standpoint and also from a financial standpoint when we go on the road.
Sure. Well, are you guys, I know the landscape of music obviously has changed so much since we were talking about that first show in 2008. And are you guys like kind of, or even yourself just doing your solo work, have you thought about like different ways of releasing music or timelines? Some people are sort of abandoning the album. It's something that I still personally really value. And I like kind of making a collection of songs that talk together and represent a moment in time. But I also notice people just sort of releasing 2 tracks, sort of almost like an A-B, sort of like a reference almost to old records. But maybe with your own group, it's like you guys seem to like get together and create something, and then maybe there's a tour cycle around it, almost sort of a more traditional approach.
Yeah, I think we've kind of stuck to that model. And then now with the advent of Spotify, and you can kind of give it a test, a teaser beforehand, a song or two. And then the last few records, we've tried to also release an EP or 2 songs or a 7-inch, a few months after the full length comes out. And I think we like that approach. We've never, aside from little compilations or things we've been asked to be on, we've never released a single song just on its own.
Yeah. Yeah. And how many releases have you guys put out?
We have 6 studio albums and a live album. 1 tour EP from a long time ago that was kind of some B-sides and rarities. And then we have 3 different 7-inch EPs. And we have a full-length reworks. And then each of those EPs have several reworks as the digital B-sides.
So I was mentioning that my doorway into your world was through the first album, River Arms, and your new solo work is called Lower River, correct?
Yes.
So it's kind of for a second there when I was writing it down, I was like, wait a minute, am I getting that right? And I was like, oh, it is quite similar.
No connection or relation in any way.
Well, tell me about that title before we get into it. Like, where did that come from?
The title Lower River. My wife and I had been interested in meditation and researching kind of deeper places of consciousness. And we're both huge David Lynch fans. And actually our very first kiss was watching Twin Peaks. When the new Twin Peaks season came out, I guess that was like, whatever that was, a year ago or 2 years ago now.
Yeah.
I got back into that world and started watching interviews and, different speaking engagements from David Lynch. And on one of them, he was talking about, or someone asked him on some panel or something, where he got his ideas from. And he was talking about the planes of consciousness and like kind of accessing this lower space. And I started thinking about that and kind of just started using that term Lower River just in speaking with my wife and talking about, what we were thinking about as a way to relate or a way to distinguish that space as a place of kind of pure creation where, where time and your surroundings and the filters of your ego and those things kind of dissipate and you're kind of just like suspended in this moment of like pure thought and pure energy. And so I called the album that, the collection of the songs that, because when I was making my solo music, all of the songs stemmed from being in that space and just experimenting with tones and textures. And it was kind of from that headspace and from that the exercise of trying to access that space that all the music kind of came about. So I kind of thought that was a fitting concept to kind of overarch over the album.
Totally. Yeah. It's when, it's interesting about the way you're describing, or Lynch just saying these sort of lower realms, because, the average, I don't know, New Age thought would be the higher realms, right?
Uh-huh.
And it's kind of cool when I think about the lower part of a river. That's the part that's about to reach probably like an ocean or a larger waterway. It's kind of like when it goes into the great source, in a sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
It's
mean,
a rich place.
yeah, he talks, and in his small book he has Catching the Big Fish. I think that's what it's called.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about the surface of the water being like, that's the kind of the easiest place to access, and that you can see the easiest. But the deeper you go into the body of water, like the stronger the current is, and the colder it is, and like the more like power there is, kind of technically, physically, and metaphorically. And that kind of just resonated with me, and something I've thought a lot, and I've been able to apply that in other. There's a Pauline Oliveros essay where she kind of talks about deep listening, and it's hitting on all these same kind of platitudes.
Yeah, I want to talk about listening as an idea. But before I do that, I'm assuming then your doorway into some of these experiences and states of mind is through transcendental meditation.
Not TM per se, but definitely in just meditating and trying to focus my mind, and just through stretching, and like actually just through deep listening is something I try to do most days to start the day. Either if it's just laying on my back and listening to a specific piece of music, um, that's a helpful way to kind of enter into that mind space.
Right. Yeah, it's something that I talk about. I've been doing a concert series that's sort of, I call it, it's a ceremony concert. So it's a mixture of concert and sort of ritual and ceremony. And what I'm sort of asking people to do is nothing more than to listen, but I call it active listening. Maybe that's another
Mm-hmm.
way of saying deep listening. And it's really
Mm-hmm.
just sort of putting your attention more in tune with, as opposed to that sort of passive listening, kind of our standard state.
Right.
And it's interesting you bring that up. I did a podcast recently with Caitlin Aurelia Smith, and I assume you're familiar with her work, the modular synthesis
Yeah,
stuff.
I actually listened to that episode recently, and
Okay, yeah, she's
her
all about
last,
listening.
yeah, we're label mates on Western Vinyl. Although
Oh, okay,
I've never
great,
met her personally.
great. Yeah, well, I'm cool that you listened to that, because like
Yeah.
that was really tripping me out. It wasn't too long ago that we spoke, and uh, I've been thinking a lot about it, like that conversation I had with her, and how it's sort of like that's a really powerful main gateway for her in life, right? And
Yeah.
she had that interesting process about how she's sort of using it and sort of asking it questions and seeing where it takes her. And it's something I've been chewing on for a while, just sort of like trying to understand it and play with it myself. So I find that really cool that for yourself too, you use that word. I saw that in the sort of the press about this record you had.
Mm-hmm.
And how did that inform the creation of the music? I hear you saying it's sort of part of your daily practice in a way, or you like, a form of meditation.
Yeah, and I think I kind of tried to access that same frame when I would um, sit down with a synthesizer or a guitar or whatever, just trying to experiment with texture. We had a little bit of a break, a little hiatus with Balmorhea, so I had some time on my hands to kind of. We've been touring and recording so much over the past 10 years. This is the first time we had like a solid 2 years with not much going on. So I really kind of dug into that, which I previously never had time for.
Was that intentional 2 years, or like you guys
Not
decided to?
not really. It's just kind of slowed down naturally for a moment, and
Mm-hmm.
so um, my bandmate Rob made a solo record, and I was working on some solo music as well, and we kind of we had some times as bookends to you know just kind of take a pause for a second while we gathered our thoughts and figured out the next step. So that was very helpful, just to let me have some time to slowly get into the world of production and musical creation, which, I mean, my solo work is kind of more minimal and textural and more atmospheric than maybe the more traditional, in a musical sense, of the world that Balmorhea resides in.
Bit more acoustic. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, and so tell me about the process of making it, because I'm personally really interested in these ideas about, you said toning, listening, creating textures. Like,
Hmm.
you know, I like to get into sometimes the tech side of this too. I mean, tell me a bit about what that creative process looked like for you, because I just want to add that sometimes when I think about like listening and then responding or creating that space to do music from, I am sometimes get into a place where it's almost too self conscious. You know, it's like if I set the stage in a way where I'm almost like thinking too hard about it, I'm like, okay, now I'm going to like do this and listen for this, and then I'm going to respond. I almost feel like the way I can get out of my own way is to not think about it and just
Right.
start
Yeah.
making noise and just, just doing it, just doing
Yeah.
stuff, making stuff. And then I'm actually not thinking about this is important or I need to,
Right. I think that's the key to get to the space where you're so immersed and so in it that you kind of lose track of that
yeah,
filter
that
that,
active
that
mind part is,
right.
yeah.
So once that dissipates, that I feel like that's when the true, like the more pure form of what you have inside of you can come out. Uh, but I think, yeah. So like I said, I started experimenting with textures, and like I got a couple of synths and would kind of just play around until I found a sound that I really liked, and I would kind of explore. Um, I always have kind of little melodies or things I hum into my phone just on the spur of the moment when I'm driving or walking or traveling. And so I had a lot of those collected, and I kind of made a big list and went through them all and deleted all the ones that were either too similar to something else that already exists, or that kind of weren't that interesting to me. And I kind of I would work on one piece a day and kind of
Mm.
think, I would kind of just hum it in my head throughout the day and try to figure out what kind of voice would best portray what was kind of hearing in my head. And sometimes that was guitar, sometimes it was a stringed instrument, cello or violin or bass, or sometimes it was more just like a texture or like a sound that I was kind of trying to emulate. And a big part of what I love about minimal compositions and experimental music is there's this great symbiosis between organic human made acoustic sounds, and then also this with new technology, this kind of digital assistance that you can make things exactly sort of how you intend. And I do love field recordings. I've always been a proprietor of employing those into whatever music I'm working on. So I took some intentional trips. One that was kind of on the Pacific coast, and then my wife and I were traveling in Italy and France, and I brought um, a little synth and my little interface and Pro Tools on my laptop and a couple of mics, and kind of collected stuff and worked on little ideas for these songs throughout all those travels. So some of these songs were actually recorded into Pro Tools all along the Pacific coast or in northern Italy throughout 2018. And then I came back home and kind of did the finishing touches and added a few more pieces, and then added all the strings, uh, cello and upright bass, and had a few other instruments added as well to kind of to finish the process.
Sure. And what synths were you using?
I used a Juno 60
Mm-hmm.
for kind of more like the bedrock of some of the pads, kind of a lot of the noise, the noise filter on that. It's really nice. And then I used this strange little cheap Yamaha Japanese. Actually, the printed stuff on the top of the synth is all in Japanese, so I had to have this. I found a manual in English I would have to keep referring to figure out what buttons did what. That a friend of mine kind of turned me on to, and a Casio SK1 actually for just some little tones. And I use a Roland RE201 Space Echo sort of as a DI box here and there, and then uh, that's kind of it for like the soft synth stuff. And then some of the stuff was a lot of it was manipulated. Some piano recordings I manipulated and kind of edited to suit the mood of each piece.
Right. And the Space Echo, is that one of the like originals with the tape in it?
Yes.
And you're using that as a DI? Does it just give it like some grit or a character?
Yeah, I mean, it has an EQ, it has a bass and treble, and then there's reverb, and then there's the echo. You can increase or decrease the rate of the delay and the intensity, so it just speeds up the motors on the tape. So it's just kind of in there just to kind of give it a little bit of warmth.
I've never thought of using that as a DI. I thought, an effects send, but it's cool.
Yeah, I mean, for all intents and purposes, just to kind of pass it through that to kind of give it a little bit more.
Yeah, right. Gotcha. Cool. And so you were talking about the process being one of like sort of this non-mind or lower river, all these different ideas sort of pointing in the same direction. Are you intending for the record itself to have, does it have that agenda to push someone into that space, or are you asking people or inviting them in a certain way to listen to it?
Yeah, kind of both. I mean, the main intent is I really want people to, well, in this current age of screen addiction and minimal attention span, and there's so much stimuli at all points of the day, no matter where you are. It's important to remember to listen and to take time to slow down and like get away from the kind of the rat race and like that pace of life.
Yes.
For myself, I've been, that's the only way I can really truly like enjoy and like savor my time and to find beauty. Like there's so much to sift through. There's so much, you have to spend so much more time trying to be inspired, I feel like, or you're falsely inspired by something that's kind of shallow. I'm not to say this music will like take you out of that, but I hope it can be, an avenue for people to like, you can't fully get it if you just put it on in the background while you're, trying to do something else. Like it's kind of forcing you to, if you really want to engage with it and kind of get anything out of it, you have to stop and listen to it, which I kind of feel like is true of anything in life that, is worthwhile. It's not like immediate or always, momentary.
Right. Something that came up for me, I was just thinking about this yesterday. I was at this conference, the Science and Non-Duality Conference in San Jose, and there was a panel on social justice in regards to non-duality, sort of like, and someone talked about, hope I get this right, was it like the cheapness of oneness when it can be used as a spiritual bypass for certain people's experience, right?
Yeah.
Probably cultural or societal. And I was thinking about, there's the only way through those spaces and the spaces that social justice in general is exploring is by people feeling heard and being able to tell their stories and their experience, and not just being very purely witnessed by others. They don't need a response. They don't need your idea about it. They just need to be listened to. And that's a way of exercising grief and a way of us sort of working through trauma and a way of coming into oneness, into health, into some kind of balance. And that's coming up for me when I hear us talking about listening, because like listening in general, it's a real gift, right? In the sense that our attention is one of the main gifts we give in the world, whether it's to a corporation or to a screen or to a lover or to anyone. Mm-hmm. And what we learn even in just like regular therapy, when people go to couples therapy, it's largely about how can you really hear someone else without screwing up that process?
Right.
Because it can go sideways so fast because you get triggered or and as it does in these situations where people are talking about race and gender and them wanting to be heard, it can go sideways really fast and get charged very quickly. So I feel like you're tapping into that same meme with this notion of like creating a stage or a mechanism through music for deep listening. And what you hear is individualistic, right? And I don't
Exactly.
think you know what you hear when you listen to Lower River is going to be unique to each person, perhaps unique to each listen.
Yep. Yeah, I hope so. I mean, it's kind of one of those things where the music I love, depending on the mood that I'm in or where I am physically or what I'm doing, every, especially for music that's dense or like complex that requires, nuance in the listening of it. I love finding new things. I'm like, oh, I never noticed that. Or if like when you try to listen to one voice within a composition, you know, when you try to pull out an individual voice, you start noticing other things along those lines, and that's something that I really enjoy in music, and all art forms, frankly. But that's something I was trying to do myself. Like the music is very simple, but there's a lot of depth, tonally and textually, to explore once you have the space and the quietude to fully take it in. I think.
Yeah, you said before false inspiration. That really stuck out to me. Um, Tell me more about what you think false inspiration is, or how you know when you are falsely inspired.
I don't know. I mean, it kind of goes back. Growing up, I look back on things and like, why did I like this, or what was it about this that was so interesting? Where now, looking back, I'm like, seems so silly or childish or like not important or relevant in any way. And I think it really has to do with the time that you're in and you're present. Like when you're fully in that moment, like you kind of lose the perspective, the foresight looking forward, and also looking, the hindsight of looking backward. And then you're like, if you're fully in the moment, um, I mean, the perception of that inspiration is real to you. So, I mean, no one's to say something is, I guess, fully falsely inspired or not, but um, I don't know. I think it's so subjective to each individual. I mean, all you can do is create what is right for you and try to explain why you did it and what it's for, and then it's up to everyone else to kind of to take it from there.
Well, sometimes I realize, just like you said, I look back on the things that either inspired me or that the beliefs I held or whatever it is. And now, of course, those have changed. And if anything, that teaches me that I'll probably look back at the things I hold true now and feel the same way. And
Hmm.
then it just makes me loosen up a bit on what I believe or what I think is this or that. It's all malleable, right? It's all a matter of this sort of egoic perception anyway. And if either way, if it's touching some part of you inside, that's a valid experience. That felt experience is true,
Right.
right? And it's meaningful in that moment, whatever judgment we may bring to it at another time.
Hmm. I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. Has any of this work that you're creating now or in the past been informed by any psychedelic experiences for you? Or is it more just sort of like what's your doorway been into these quote unquote lower realms?
Yeah. Never in a way of via substance, but in a way of, I don't know how to explain it. Just like I've always been inspired more wholly by sound and by music than anything else. Um, Second would be like being in nature and like experiencing the grandeur and beauty of the massiveness of nature. But um, for my own self, the way I can feel moved or inspired, or frankly just feel alive from a certain progression of chords or like this certain harmony, like I don't. It's something that you can't really explain, or
Right.
I mean, there is a science to it technically that of the airwaves moving and the interlocking of of the notes and this and that. And I'm sure there's, I have no formal music training, but there was a
No
musical
training.
No, I mean, I took guitar lessons, throughout my adolescence, but,
You mind if we take a quick sidetrack here? I mean, so
sure.
when you grew up, you didn't study any music with any lessons, or was there like music in your household, or did this just? Are you a
Yeah,
black sheep in the family?
not the black sheep. Not really. But I mean, my dad played guitar, played like folk guitar, like on a nylon classical guitar. And every night when I was a kid, he would play my brother and I songs. And so I kind of grew up being sung to and played guitar to from my father. And he kind of taught me the basic, chords in the first position on a guitar. And I think when I was about 12, I got a Fender Stratocaster for Christmas one year and started taking lessons. And um, I always was memorizing music I liked, and I always kind of envisioned myself being a musician. Even before I started playing guitar, I would like act like I was playing guitar, and I spent a lot of time listening to music from a very early age, like collecting cassette tapes, and always music in either of my parents' cars. Not really at home playing that much, but definitely throughout my day, every day there was some sort of music. But yeah, by the age of 12, I was like fully immersed in trying to learn and emulate other songs I liked on guitar, and I've I haven't stopped playing since.
Would you say that like the listening and how that's been a doorway for your creative process on this record stems out of a form of grief for you, or it's a way of trying to reconnect with something?
That's interesting. Hmm. I wouldn't
I'm sure
necessarily.
it's not one thing,
Right. Yeah.
but
So,
it's
and
sort of
sometimes it
where it
is
stems
kind of like
from.
a lament. My listening, my desire to listen to a certain type of music or to a certain album or song or whatever comes from a place of like lament, perhaps, or like a not a wallowing, but kind of like a more. Yeah, I wouldn't really say grief. It's more of just like a mood.
Well,
This is also cyclical with seasons. I feel like in the winter, when it's kind of darker and colder, I really listen to a lot more quieter music and classical music and minimal stuff. And then when it's brighter and sunnier, I listen to things that kind of relate to that season a little differently. But I think I don't know. I mean, I have a pretty wide range of stuff I like to listen to, which I
like what?
think is well. I grew up listening to really heavy music, like '80s hair metal and Iron Maiden and old Metallica. But then on the other side of this, I was uh, really inspired by this guy called Ray Lynch, who was popular in the mid to late '80s, and he had an album called Deep Breakfast, which is like pure new age. Um,
Love that title.
yeah, it's incredible. My dad, we were in a Sam Goody record store. I grew up in San Diego, and in San Diego, we went to the record store. We were at the mall one day, and it was playing in the record store. And my dad was like, "What?" Asked the clerk what it was, and he bought the tape, and that was like in his. We played that in his car, like going to school and every day for years.
Wow.
And I still, and I found a copy on vinyl. I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago. So I still listen to it. That was a really influential album for me. And in my mom's car, she had the cassette tape of Graceland by Paul Simon, which never left that tape deck for like 3 or 4 years. So, I mean, I don't know. So it goes from like, Metallica, Master of Puppets to this new age album, Deep Breakfast, to like Paul Simon. And then, you know, growing up listening, like being in the grunge era of like Nirvana and Soundgarden and those things. And then moving into like Fugazi and getting into like older punk, like Bad Brains and Misfits and Minor Threat. But the really important album to me that I feel like kind of broke open my musical mind in a sense of thinking about music and myself creating it and like what was possible was I think it was it was 1996. when I first heard it, but the first album from Tortoise, the band from
Oh,
Chicago,
yeah.
their first album, the self-titled album, which I believe came out in '94. Um, I was I was visiting a friend. We had moved to Texas, and I went back to San Diego to visit my best childhood friend, and he had just gotten that album and put it on. And at first, I was like, "This is such weird music," and then I I got really into it. And when I came back to Texas, I bought a copy, and that never left my turntable for like a year. I would just flip it over and over and over every night. I would be doing my homework and just listening to that album, and that kind of got me into like the instrumental, sort of rock based instrumentation.
Right.
Um, and then from there, it's kind of just all over the place. But really, from when we started Balmorhea in 2006, um, the music that was going on at that time, Type Records, was big at the moment. And so all of those bands, and just from touring and meeting other people, and I don't know, there's just so much, there's so many avenues in music you can be inspired from. Um, I don't know. I like having a lot of different sources to, especially now with Spotify and Tidal and these things, it's so easy to,
It's amazing. Yeah, you can hear all sorts of stuff.
just based on what the exact thing you're feeling, you can just, tap your screen a few times and it's playing into your ears.
Yeah. I know, man. I mean, it was only not too long ago. I just saw this video that was kind of old, and it was talking about like they're using music for people who have dementia, who are kind of completely nonverbal, and then they play their favorite music and they come to life. And it was
Mm-hmm.
Oliver Sacks was in this documentary, and he's saying, with the advent of the technology of something the size of a matchbox that can play music that hundreds of songs, and it's like how quickly it's just been cruising along, the technology of music and how that's changed how we listen to it and how it's changed what role it plays in our lives. It's never been more pervasive in the world, probably in the history of the world, unless you believe in like previous civilizations, than now. And I would only think it's going to continue to integrate more deeply into our life in ways we haven't quite even thought about,
Right.
seamlessly. And
Some sort of implant or something.
God knows, man. But I mean, I do thought experiments to think about this, and none of them are great. But I'm thinking what might happen. I've worked with a few startups that are trying to do AI based music. They're all terrible right now, but you know, we also just like supposedly got into quantum supremacy with Google, and they're making computers that can do in 200 seconds what it takes another computer to do in 10,000 years.
Hmm.
It's like God knows what we can do. And I would imagine like the idea of a playlist would become personalized to the level of like your Spotify is like your own AI, and it will make you whatever music you want in the moment on the fly infinitely.
Yeah,
Now,
that seems plausible. Yeah.
maybe. But what I also believe, and I've seen this evidenced in my own work, and I know you've seen this too, there is a hunger for the genuine and the authentic, and you see that like in the live performance. There's an increased yin yang type effect. With more technology, there's more of a desire for like that personal, real experience, like human to human, because it's necessary, I
Mm-hmm.
think, to feel alive, and that's not going to go away. So it's not like we can just have computers doing our art. I don't believe that can be true, because something about the experience and connection, whether music is making you feel more connected to yourself or connected to others through groups, that's going to increase as a need. I believe.
Yeah, I still think there's nothing that can replace the human in musical creation, the human touch of the human's breath, or like the texture of humans' hands on a strings, like.
Yes.
And
The
then
human
also,
voice really is what it
right,
is, kind of the original thing that almost can never probably be fully replicated.
sure, or like the human's breath going through a tube, and then
Mm-hmm.
cutting off, making the pitch shorter or longer based on where your fingers are covering a hole. Like the the sound of that can't be replicated by. I mean, sort of in some ways it can be, but not fully. And just the tactile like viscera of you know seeing something live and watching someone move their hands or their jaw, and then the airwaves are changed, and you can see that and feel that right in front of you. Like, especially if you're at a louder concert or something, or like in an acoustic space, hearing like a perfectly, a cello being perfectly moved around a room, like that's designed like in a concert hall or something like that. There's nothing that can kind of replace that.
I agree. And I also think there's something that we haven't been able to quantify. There's like that missing je ne sais quoi. There's an energy transference between a person and a person. There's
Oh
something
yeah,
there that's more than the sum of its parts of just tones and ratios and so forth.
sure. Especially when, if like a show, like if you go to YouTube and like watch old Fugazi shows where like the crowd is like on the stage and singing all the words, and like there is something to that you can't really replicate otherwise.
I saw Fugazi play in Poughkeepsie, New York, and it was like,
Uh,
I mean, they weren't at their height. It was probably, at that point, let me think, maybe 1998, 97, something like that.
hmm,
I don't know, but
it's incredible.
I'm glad someone dragged me there so I could
Oh,
check
it's
that
great.
out.
I've never seen them. I wish I could. I keep crossing my fingers for some sort of reunion or something.
Could happen.
We'll see.
So are you doing music full time?
Yeah, as at this moment, yes. I do photography too, kind of editorial and some landscapes and some interiors. I did that, music and photography half and half between like 2006 and maybe 2015, 16. And around 2015, I co-managed the band with Rob, my partner in Balmorhea. So between that and starting my own solo project, like that's kind of all there's time for.
Right. Yeah, I know how
And
that goes.
yeah, and thankfully we like you mentioned in the beginning, we have done some sync work. For those who don't know, sync is when you get a song placed in a TV show or a film or an ad. So that's been a large part of our being able to stay active this long is by having those little placements. You know, Sometimes there's a better one, and sometimes there's not. But um, the general projection is going forward, and so we're trying to do that more and more. Um,
Yeah, scoring. Do you guys do any scoring?
yeah, we scored a French feature film last fall. I don't think it ever came out in the U.S., but it was in France, Spain, Italy, and Switzerland, I believe, theatrically. We've done one other feature film in 2010 that actually won Best Narrative Direction at the Tribeca Film Fest, called Dog Pound, uh, which I was really proud of the music. That was like a full feature score. Pretty intense subject matter about these teenagers that get sent to like this high security detention center in rural Canada for like kind of like a juvenile hall, but a juvenile detention center, but about all the ongoings and political things going on in there. It's pretty intense.
Okay.
Not for the faint of heart. We've done a few documentaries and short films, and we did a video game once that was like a children's video game in England, and
Who's
I don't know.
repping you for the publishing stuff or the sync stuff?
Our publishing team is based in London. It's called Manners McDade, and we've been with them for a few years now, and we just re-signed. They've been great, and then everything else from the master side, from the recording side, is through our label Western Vinyl, and we've worked with a couple other people that help pitch us for to TV studios or movies and things like that.
But you've never gone the management route besides doing it yourselves. That's an interesting approach.
Not for lack of trying. Like, we've always wanted help and always tried to. There's been a few times where we've had actual contracts, but nothing's ever.
Yeah.
Nothing's ever been quite exactly right, or wasn't the right time, or didn't feel exactly right. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of nice being on the inside track of the dealings of everything, from the tours to the record to the design of the little logistical things. We've kind of gotten used to dealing with all that and being being so close to it, I don't know. It would be pretty hard to let someone else just take over. It would be nice to not have to answer emails, a few every day, but kind of used to it
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. And as you guys are moving forward with the band, I asked you at the beginning about sort of like creative, intentional constraints, maybe, instruments or the sound. You've had that consistency, but are you going to kind of hold to that? Or would you say, hey, let's do a record with a vocalist, or let's do such and such, or I don't know, just kind of follow where your interests are going? Or do you feel like you've created a fan base and you want to stay within a certain world?
I think that we, like you said, we have created kind of a sound world that we exist within, and I think with each album, there's kind of this bedrock that kind of sounds the same. There's been some liberties where we take a different direction, but there's still at the same time this kind of overarching similarity and congruency between, from album to album. And there's times when we've kind of pared it back. Our album Constellations is like a lot more quiet and more classically arranged, and then our album in 2012 Stranger is much more like percussive and rock influenced, I guess you could say. There's like some like distorted
There's some
elements,
jams,
and
yeah,
it's kind of a little more upbeat and a little more complex. And then the new stuff we're working on now is kind of back the other way, where it's more classical, and we're adding some woodwinds and brass, and it's kind of, but it still kind of retains the same, underlying feeling somehow. I think that's important, that we don't want to, it has to make sense and fit in the world. We wouldn't do something completely different ever, I don't think.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to it. And when does Lower River come out? Is it out now? It's not, right?
Lower River came out 2 days ago, last Friday.
2 days ago? Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, so that's out on all platforms, and it's just under my own name with my middle initial, Michael A. Muller, Muller. So
wonderful.
You can get away and put some nice headphones on and lay on the ground, or float in the ocean and listen to it.
Yeah, man. Take it into a float tank. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Deprivation. Yep.
Cool. And any other ways, best ways for people to connect with you? You think, would you prefer just to find the music on the platforms? What if they want some vinyl or anything like that?
Yeah, the vinyl was pressed by a label in Portland, Oregon called Beacon Sound. So you can go to Beacons. I think it's beaconsound.com. Or just type in Beacon Sound Lower River, you'll find it. It's also available on my Bandcamp, and my website is michael-muller.com. And it's out there. If you just search for Lower River, you'll find it.
Did Beacon Sound just do a deal with you, like just for the vinyl?
Yep, just for the vinyl.
Cool.
And a small label from Sweden called 1631 Recordings is handling all the digital.
Yeah, I released a record with them a few years ago.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, they're cool. David, right?
Yeah, David. Yep.
Yeah.
He's an old friend, and kind of kept in touch over the years.
Yeah, I have a record they have called Held that you'd probably like. It's mostly just piano and some strings. It's one of my favorite records.
Oh, awesome. I'll check that out.
Very peaceful and intimate.
Yeah.
Sweet, man. Well, thanks so much for taking the time. It's a real joy for myself just to be able to let you know that you've been an inspiration to me over the years, and I'm happy to be able to dig into this new work of yours, and I look forward to crossing paths sometime.
Likewise. Thank you so much for your time. It was my pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you, Michael, for joining us. Always awesome to be able to talk to folks who have inspired me in the past. Please check out his album, Lower River. It's amazing. And check out all of Balmorhea's catalog, particularly River Arms, that first record. But they have so many. They've been around a long time. They've kind of been doing what they've been doing a little longer than me, so they have a lot of releases too. And they put on a great live show if you ever get a chance to see them. This music that you're hearing in the background, it is called Limitations. It's an older East Forest track. You guys keep walking your walk. Don't take any shit, but if you do, please do it with grace.